What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video review, and today I'll be taking a look at the Sub 01 from LIAN Li. Now this case has been around, I would say, for a few months now. It did launch right before Computex and we were pretty busy working on that event, so we're just getting around to reviewing it now. So like always, I'll be checking out everything about the case, motherboard support, GPU support. This is a bit different. GPU is at the front, that's the only dedicated spot. It is done by a riser cable. You can't fit the GPU in the traditional layout style. It's got dual 360 cooling options around the rear, PSU in the bottom, so it is quite different. And then I'll also talk about custom water cooling support, everything you need to know, and then I'll show you the final build. This isn't the final build. I did this one already as a time-lapse video, but I always wanted to do the build in the white one and do the loop including the CPU and the GPU together, whereas this one is air-cooled GPU because you can't get a block for this one. So this is just a CPU loop. So the other one I'm going to show has a full loop including the CPU and the GPU. So let's jump in and get started.
It's nice to see something refreshing for a change, and that's definitely what the Sub 01 from LIAN Li is all about. We first saw this interesting case at Computex 2023 and then in person at their 2024 Digital Expo at the start of the year, and I'm glad this case has made it to market. The Sub 01 is on the smaller side, coming in at 535 high, 410 deep and only 211 wide, thus making the case quite compact with a bit of height to it. The chassis is by no means meant to fit into the small form factor or ITX category, although ITX and MATX motherboards are supported. The layout in the Sub 01 is different. Motherboard goes in the main section, GPU at the front, PSU at the bottom and dual 360 cooling options at the rear. Exterior aesthetics are clean, nothing over the top, and might seem a little bland to some, but I think it's just perfect with subtle RGB lighting around the side and front. The front, top and rear side panels are all made from fine mesh, with just the front and top mesh panels including magnetic dust filters. The rear doesn't include a dust filter as this panel is designed for exhausting air. The way LIAN Li intends for case airflow is the two rear 360 spots are to exhaust air out the back of the case, intaking from the rear. The main side panel is made from LIAN Li's usual 4mm thick tempered glass, which is 100% clear on the white and I would say about a medium tint on the black model. All four panels push off and on and are a nice snug fit. I feel the need for locking these panels down via screws isn't needed on this case. The rest of the chassis is made up of steel, while plastic is used for the feet. One plastic slide out dust filter can be found at the bottom for the PSU, but just be careful when lifting the case, as the dust filter is in the exact spot where I grab under the chassis and sometimes wants to slide out while I move or transport the case. For front I/O, we find them located at the front on the main side of the case. There's two USB 3.0 Type A ports, a 3.1 Type C port and an audio combo port. As I said earlier, the Sub 01 features an RGB strip around the front and side, and these can be controlled via the C button for color and M button for mode. A long press on the mode button will sync this RGB strip to a motherboard's RGB header. One neat feature for the power and reset button is that LIAN Li has actually used the LIAN for the power and Li for the reset, and these are also in chrome, which is hard to see on camera but does look really nice in person. Moving inside, and I'll start with the motherboard side first. Support here going by LIAN Li is up to ATX, although I decided to test out an EHX board and it seems my test ROG Z790 Extreme board does fit okay. 24-pin fitment seems fine, and even with this ROG Strix 4090 installed, there's plenty of room between. One thing to note, things might get a bit tight in this area if using 4-slot cards, but you don't see many of them around. With the ATX boards, grommet holes are covered and cables will need to go around the motherboard tray to the back, then down into the PSU. For standard ATX boards, 24-pin cable fitment is spot on and grommets lined up perfectly along the right side of the motherboard. Along the bottom, you'll find two more large cable grommets for the bottom motherboard headers. For EPS connectors, no grommets are found here and cables just run over the top and down into the PSU. The Sub 01 also supports back connect motherboards. I had no issues here testing the TUF Z790 BTF or the MSI Z790 Project Zero. One thing I'd like to see is when using back connect motherboards that maybe an accessory be included are covers that clip onto the motherboard tray that covers up all the cable grommet holes, as these are no longer needed. One area to mention with the Sub 01 are all the PCI slots are low profile only. The GPU is specifically designed to be installed at the front of the chassis, which I'll cover soon. All 7 slots on the Sub 01 will not support full width cards, and this is something to keep in mind if you require the use of more than one PCIe slot. As the GPU is routed towards the front, LIAN Li does include a 500mm PCIe riser cable, and this is either white or black depending on the case model you go with. This is a standard LIAN Li Gen 4 riser, but it's housed in a low profile bracket which includes some RGB. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this, and probably not the last. The RGB on this bracket is controlled by the case RGB controls, while the cable runs out the back of the bracket, around the back of the case, and then back inside. Moving on to GPU support, and I think LIAN Li have done a good job here accommodating for different sized GPUs. Video cards are installed at the front of the case into a 4-slot bracket. This bracket is adjustable and removable. I found it best to remove this bracket first, install your GPU onto this outside the case, then drop it back into place. There are 2 different height options when installing the bracket back in. This would mainly come into effect if using the bottom dual drive cage directly under for 3.5-inch hard drives, or for really long GPUs where extra length is required. With the GPU bracket in its highest position, there is 63mm of clearance for GPU display cables to the top of the drive cage, and max GPU length in this position is roughly 375mm. With the GPU bracket dropped down to its lowest position, there is now 40mm of clearance for GPU display cables to the top of the drive cage, and roughly 394mm of clearance for your graphics card. Apart from up and down movement, this bracket can also slide left to right for wider GPUs. I think for air-cooled GPUs, you want this bracket roughly centered to keep your video card in the middle of the chassis. But for water-block GPUs being wider, you may need this bracket pushed towards the right for terminal clearance. With this bracket pushed all the way to the right, clearance here for water-block GPUs is roughly 175mm. For GPU support to stop any wobble, LIAN Li includes a brace that is installed at the top. This has a few adjustments, and I found for my air-cooled Strix 4090 it worked perfectly and held the card in place firmly. I also found at the end of the Strix GPU had a few screw threads that lined up perfectly with this brace, so I was able to physically screw the brace down. You also notice that most of my test GPUs had some sort of mounting at the end of the coolers, so you may have some luck as well. For shorter cards less than 315mm in length, for example this Asus 4080 Pro, LIAN Li state in the manual to flip this bracket around. This will now go lower, down to cards 286mm in length, but unfortunately this was still not enough for my Strix 4090 with an EK block. With water block GPUs, there really isn't any way to brace them properly, as part of the bracket that does attach needs to run down a bit longer. So I guess for those looking to go with a custom loop in this chassis, a bit of DIY work will be in order. For GPU display cable routing, it was definitely tough with the top hard drive location being used. With no hard drive in the spot, it was much easier installing GPU display cables. Cables are then fed out the rear of the chassis through the cable grommet. CPU cooler height for the Sub-Zero one is something to be mindful of, as this case is very narrow, and in this case there's only 88mm of clearance. This is so low that even some all-in-one coolers will not fit in the Sub-Zero one, like the ROG Ryujin 3. Moving on to storage, and we find 2 main areas. 2 2.5-inch SSDs are supported under the motherboard and are hidden under the mirror aesthetic LIAN Li has added to the Sub-Zero one. This is a nice touch and makes SSDs being used in this area completely hidden. 2 more drive spots can be found in front of the PSU location. This is a dual drive cage, with each drive taking one 2.5-inch SSD or one 3.5-inch hard drive. This cage can be completely removed altogether by 2 screws underneath, or just the top tray can be removed by 1 thumb screw. PSU location is found at the bottom back, which is what I would call the traditional location. Units are slid in from the back and secured in place via the PSU bracket. PSU length including cables is 245mm right up to the hard drive cage. If you require longer, the drive cage can be completely removed like I mentioned above, which will now give you 290mm to the GPU bracket opening. For rear cable management, LIAN Li have included a heap of Velcro tie downs and a hard plastic clip for EPS cable routing. There's also a dedicated controller or RGB hub spot right behind the motherboard. I'll touch base on cable management at the end of the video. LIAN Li includes 3 120mm non-RGB fans in the Sub-Zero one. These are already daisy chained together and are ready to plug in via one 4-pin PWM connector. I don't normally agree with including fans in cases, but I think LIAN Li has got it right here. Most times when fans are included in cases, there's never enough, and it also forces you to buy more of those type of fans. With the Sub-Zero one, the 3 included fans are all you need to fill the case. The empty 360 fan spot next to the 3 included fans would be for your all-in-one cooler, which comes with their own fans anyway. I highly recommend leaving the stock fans in the Sub-Zero one, even if they aren't RGB, as you won't see them anyway. For all-in-one and custom water cooling support, there isn't really too many options in the Sub-01. The case is really aimed at all-in-one cooling with two 360 locations around the back, with one being preferred over the other. As I said earlier, the Sub-01 comes with 3 pre-installed fans in the left 360 fan location, and the right 360 location is empty for all-in-one coolers. The right is the preferred all-in-one cooler location, as air is taken in from the rear through the all-in-one cooler and out the back of the chassis. Both of these brackets are removable by one screw in each corner and then lifted out. But before this, the top bracket needs to be removed first. I like this top cover as being removable. It gives you just that little bit of extra access from the top once the fan brackets are installed back in, and it also helps hold all-in-one cooler tubing in place. One neat trick LIAN Li has done is making it easy to install all-in-one coolers. As the motherboard side is quite narrow, I was trying to figure out how to squeeze the pump and block from the all-in-one cooler down from the top. Luckily, this top bar is removable, making this possible. Once this bracket was removed, I had no issues installing my test EK Nucleus 360 all-in-one cooler. Moving on to custom radiator support, and the main thing to take note here is that the left and right radiator brackets are not made the same. Height-wise, yes, but width-wise, no. The right bracket can fit 360 radiators up to 130mm wide. For example, this EK-S360 fits fine, and so does this Hardware Labs GTX 360, whereas the left bracket can only fit radiators up to 120mm wide. The previous two mentioned radiators will not fit in the left bracket, but this Bitspower Terrask 3 360S does fit in the left bracket fine. For radiator width, including fans, there is roughly 93mm from each bracket to the motherboard tray. Although thicker radiators will fit, I do recommend sticking to slim radiators so airflow isn't blocked.
Now, like always, let's check out the final build. Now, some last few things to cover before I wrap this review up. The right side bracket, so that was a bracket that was empty, that had no pre-installed fans. That can actually take up to two 140mm fans or a 280 radiator. So if you got something like an all-in-one cooler, you can definitely use that in that spot. So that's kind of handy in case you have that. I doubt you'll probably need to use any fans in that. Even for a custom loop, I would still rather go with the two 360s like I've done here instead of going with the 280. It would be a little bit weird. There is a rear fan bracket now. I'm just using one of the included fans as a template. This goes on the back. It goes roughly, I'll throw some B-roll up. It goes like this on the back, so it does stick out a little bit. I would say a bit over 25mm because that's the width of the fan, and it does fit in there like so. And you can slide that left or right. Probably not really needed. If you want extra airflow, I would say in the rear chamber, not so much in this main chamber, because if you're blowing in this way, which is the way you're meant to in the rear, you probably wouldn't exhaust this fan because then you're going to be pulling the air that's going to be cooling your all-in-one cooler in the back. So you'd be going in, and then if it's going in this way, it's not really doing anything, but you'd mainly want it to go into the rear chamber. So it's kind of handy that they do include that. I don't think too many people will be strapping that on the back. I did manage to route the wire through the little hole that the RGB is connected on here. So this RGB cable that runs on the back, I ran that back through that hole, so it was out of sight. It didn't really have any cables running down the back and then back in the bottom. It was pretty clean. Now, rear cable management, I was really impressed. I had no issues at all. I probably did cheat a bit having that back connected motherboard. It just made everything so much easier, but in saying that, it doesn't really make it too much difference. Like, it just moves a 24 pin instead of wrapping around. The 24 pin just plugs in from the back. Same with the EPS, they ran straight down. And then the GPU, obviously not being part of the BTF, this is a BTF board that could take the BTF GPU, but as I said earlier, you can't fit standard width GPUs in normally, so I can't take advantage of that BTF slot. So that's why I cannot use it. But even then, the cable routing for that was fine. And then the rest of the cable routing, I did take out the hard drive bay down the bottom. If you're not using hard drives, I don't think too many people are, I would advise to remove that hard drive cage, both of them, and it frees up a lot of room as well down the bottom. So no issues with rear cable management. Now, some of the things I didn't really like, it's not so much about this case, it's just how this orientation is done. Now, normally when you have a vertical GPU, which a lot of people like, when it sits in the front of the case, it normally covers up. I think the riser cables are quite ugly. So LIAN Li have done a great job with this bracket. They've incorporated the riser cable in an RGB bracket. Looks really nice, but in the stock configuration, you have the cable running straight down. I really wish you could completely make that disappear. I tried the best I can in both of these builds. This build, I probably went a bit over the top. I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But this one, I made as simple. I can't take it off now. I just double-sided taped it on. This is something like 4mm aluminum. It was very, very hard to bend. I just have a vise which has a sort of a bending kit in it. The more you wind it, it pushes your material in like a wedge and it just bends it for you. That was very hard. I had to whack it with a hammer. Probably not the best way to do, but I wanted to make a nice sleek sort of a S curve to cover that cable. And I think it came out pretty good. It took me about an hour to do. I polished it up, vinyl wrapped it, and it looks really good. But I really think LIAN Li probably can't sort of say it's a negative. If they could try and have a cover that they could clip on and it makes the cable run down. It doesn't have to be this narrow, it can be a bit wider. I did have to bunch the riser cable up. If it was a bit wider and it just ran down and clipped on, that would make everything just so much neater. The other thing is the GPU support for Waterbox. As I mentioned before, the wouldn't call it anti-sag, it was more like the anti-wobble for GPUs, because without that bracket on, even an air-cooled GPU, they would wobble a lot. Like this one in here, it's got the bracket on, no issues at all. But if I move this bracket up, there's quite a bit of wobble. There's even more wobble on Waterbox GPUs, mainly due to the weight and how they're designed. So without having this support holding up the top, mine wasn't too bad because I went with hard tubing. Hard tubing goes into this panel here I made up, so it's fixed it into a sort of a dedicated spot. So there's not much movement. If I move this case, this is not going anywhere. Someone was to go Waterblock with soft tubing, that would be a bit of an issue. So you're gonna have to do some DIY work to make a bracket. It wouldn't be too hard. You just need to run something from the top or from the back just to stabilize it. Look, you don't have to do anything at all if you want, but when you start plugging in your GPU display cables, it does get a bit wobble and does move around. So a DIY solution might be needed, but I don't think too many people are going to be custom water cooling in this case. Like, it was really fun to do. Both these builds were really fun. So if you are looking at a different case, something that's not used very often in terms of the layout, this is a really fun case to do some custom water cooling in. Now, one last thing I want to talk before I talk about the builds is be careful with the all-in-one cooler height. So I actually don't have it. The ROG Ryzen 3, I think it's pronounced, that one was too high. Now this is the same, but this is the ROG water block, same as on the all-in-one cooler, but this is the water block for custom loops. This is too high. It just sticks out. Like, it's not going to stop you from doing the build. It just means you can't put the side panel back on because it sticks out. So bear in mind, I did mention that the height, I think it was 88 millimeters. I'll put it on the screen if that was incorrect, but I'm pretty sure it was 88 millimeters. Air coolers, you will have to keep that in mind as well. Most water blocks I think will be fine. Most all-in-one coolers should be fine, but definitely this one. I think ROG went a bit nuts in terms of this water block because it's got the fan underneath, it's got the LCD screen that comes off, and it's very, very high. I haven't seen any others that are like that. So just keep in mind when you do plan your build, whether it's an all-in-one cooler, an air cooler, or a custom loop. I think custom loop, every block should be fine. Like this EK Edge one, no issues at all. I've even got extenders on these angles. Everything fits in fine. The side panel goes on, so that's fine. Just with the two other types, air or all-in-one, make sure you check the measurements on the sort of the pump and the block top to make sure it's going to fit. Now about this build, a few things I mainly want to cover is the aesthetics around the motherboard. The white acrylic I used, it is just gloss standard white acrylic. As I said earlier in this video, when you use a BTF board, all your connectors are shot out the rear, so you don't really need to access anything in the front. You don't need your front panel connectors, you don't need your USB. The only thing they put up the top is a CPU fan header. I didn't use that. I used the optional one around the rear because there's no point running a cable into that. It's just going to defeat the purpose. So you're going to have everything around the case, all of the motherboard tray not used, same as in the black one here. Although this one's non-BTF, I still managed to make it pretty clean by wrapping the cable around past the acrylic cover I made. So it would be really sweet if case manufacturers that are doing BTF can do these magnetic covers. Obviously this was a big I would say like a C shape, but inverted the other way, so it goes a C like this way, and then it just sort of popped on, and then the motherboard went around it. Had to make it really tight in terms of measurements because there's not much clearance between where all the connectors pop out the back. In terms of making this, I don't have a laser cutter, I don't have anything like that. A lot of you guys always ask for my CAD files. I don't do anything in CAD. Obviously, if I do it by hand, I just do the measurements myself, and then I cut all of this out with a miter saw. Miter saws do have a certain depth on how far you can cut, and I have a table saw as well, but I just use a miter saw. A lot of these cuts weren't very long. Obviously when I get in the corners, I can't do that on a miter saw, then I use a jigsaw, then I sand it down, and that is it. Obviously something like this, even if I did have a laser cutter, I probably wouldn't even get that out. It would just take too long to draw it all up. I can just go cut, cut, cut. This can be the edge up here, can already be the edge on the sheet. This can be the side edge, and then I just have to cut this one down the bottom, and then maybe a notch here where it had to be notched out for the GPU bracket. So that's pretty much it. And I think this cleans it up really, really well. And even on this one as well, you don't see any of the grommets, you don't see anything at all. But yeah, it'd be sweet if they could do covers that just clipped on here, clipped on there, clipped on there. And obviously, because I was doing the covers like this, I decided to run the tubing through, and somehow out of luck, I didn't have to drill any of the case out because the two tubes here for the CPU, this is where the grommet for the 24 pin was behind, so that managed to go straight through the case, didn't have to do any chopping. And then there was also another grommet around here for your SATA normally when going non-BTF, so you'd have all your SATA down here, other ports, and these two happen to go straight through where that grommet was as well. Obviously I took the grommets out because there's no point going over the top, but I managed to get these 4 tubes go straight through holes that were already in the case. Previously, before when I do this, most times you get like some of the case frame in there and you have to cut it out, but this made it much, much easier. As I said earlier, no issues with GPU wobble because this is hard tubed in, and it's not just hard tubed in, it's also fixed to this stationary board here, so that does help with wobble. And then the also mentioned the PCIe riser cable cover I made up out of aluminum and just stuck on there. Like, you can do anything for that. You could just bend a bit of acrylic, you don't have to use aluminum this thick, but you can just get creative, and I think it cleans up the build really, really nicely. Now this one over here, I did go a little bit crazy in terms of covering everything up. I also made a riser, not really a full riser cable, just a little bracket cover that went over the top of it. You can't really see it, but it just sits on the 16 by riser cable at the top. Then I made this cover over here, and then I decided to pop a screen in it, put some stats on there as well when it's on, and then I managed to fit a full, this is an EK-FLT 360 that's got the DDC, and that went all the way along the bottom, and then I just put another cover trim piece because the black on the FLT didn't quite match the rest of the black I used, and that cleaned it up nicely. And then obviously this one here had the air-cooled GPU because this one doesn't have a block available for it because it's a tough 7900 GRE, so I don't think anyone's going to make a block for that, so that's why it's air-cooled. And then for this one, I've actually done a time-lapse build already. You can see that. Decided not to do a time-lapse build video for this, so I just wanted to showcase it in this review instead of doing the actual build. But last thing I want to cover is the price, and I think the price is pretty good for this case. It's not a massive case, but people have to understand, or because the case is a little bit smaller, doesn't mean it's going to be cheaper. They still have to manufacture all the tooling for it. A lot of even ITX cases are very expensive, all because they're small, it doesn't make them cheaper. So this retails for $149.99 US, so that is $150, and that also includes the riser cable. So you get the RGB cover, you get the cable, same as on this one. I did remove the RGB cover because I didn't need it because it's all hidden. So that's basically a $50 riser cable you're getting included in the case for the SUP-01. So overall, I think it's a pretty good price. You get the good water cooling options around the back, two 360s. I used slims for both. One thing to mention or to cover again are the different widths around for those radiator brackets. The left one can do 120mm wide rads. Not many rads do that. I think Bitspower and Corsair will be the only ones. Then the right bracket can do 130, so things like EK rads, and then Hardware Labs at 130, they're slightly a little bit wider. So that's why this build, if you're watching the video, I started off with 2 EK rads. I actually did not know that the rad brackets were different. Then towards the end, I swapped out the left one for a Bitspower because that fits. Luckily I had it on hand, and then I kept the right one as the EK rad because that fits. So I think that's pretty much it on this video. I just want to thank LIAN for sending me these two cases to check out, do a review. Had a really good time building both of these. It's good to see something different than all your standard traditional cases that are out on the market. But anyway, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.